Okay, here we go, number 4 then. Let's bring this up. So this is slightly different. The sort of questions are slightly different on this section. I personally find this quite a confusing section. So I'm going to go quite slowly through this. So first of all, we're going to look at why. Why did this whole industry, this cattle industry, develop in the West? Then we're going to look at what life was like for the cowboys and what the dangers were like. And then lastly, why cattlemen became ranchers. So let's just look through this. There's primarily 5 reasons why they drove their cattle north. So we've looked at this before and talked about it in great detail. The most important reason was the American Civil War. The Texas was part of the Confederacy, the southern states, and a lot of the men went obviously fighting in the east and left their cattle. And when they returned, they found that the cattle repopulated and increased massively. So they had a huge amount of cattle to sell. But obviously the prices in Texas were very low. Now at this time, as it says number 2 there, the cities in the east like Boston, New York, etc. were getting huge immigration waves, particularly from southern Europe like Italy and Spain. They obviously had a taste, spaghetti bolognese and all the rest of it, for beef. So the demand for beef grew. So the Texans thought, hold on a minute, why don't we make a lot of money here? So they began to think about driving their cattle further north. Now what helped them, well, a number of things here, was firstly the building the railroads from transcontinental. So the lines were probably roughly, if we're looking at a map, roughly in the middle of America, going east to west primarily, and they had to drive their cattle quite a way up towards those rail hubs. Now people like Goodnight and Loving, I love those names, effectively came up, what they would do with their cattle was sell it to the US Army. The US Army were building a series of forts in the Midwest to defend homesteaders against Indians, and also they decided, ironically, to sell their meat to the Indians on the reservation. So the US government were buying meat to provide food for their soldiers and, ironically, for the Indians on the reservation. And they made a huge amount of money. Now this guy Joseph McCoy was a bit of an entrepreneur. He was from Chicago and he decided to establish the town of Abilene, which was on a railroad, and he advertised the fact that he was the main man. He built stock pens, he advertised Abilene as a shipping point, and he bought cows, or I should say these Texan Longhorns, the beast you can see there, for about $5 and sold them in the east for about $50. A huge amount of money to be made here. Now one of the problems was this animal carried something called Texas fever, and basically it spread to other cows and was a pretty horrific disease, so homesteaders didn't really like them very much. Dangers. So this was a big journey. Normally different groups of men, they had drag riders at the back, the trail boss at the front, the point riders were trying to keep them in tow. So this was a really physically demanding thing that went on for a long period of time. So they got attacked by Indians. There were stampedes of cattle. There was natural hazards like floods, lack of water, and really the isolation as well. If you get a minor injury and a minor infection, that could become quite serious. So it certainly wasn't the life of Riley. They were quite not paid very well either. As young guys basically living a life on the trail, it was a very tough life at that. Okay, now why did they become sort of cowboys on ranches? There's a number of reasons. Primarily it was the spread of homesteaders, and homesteaders used barbed wire to obviously fence off their land. This really prevented them driving their cattle, so very similar to the buffalo herds. They were prevented from moving their cattle northwards, and some guy called John Eliff had enough of this and decided, hold on a minute, he drove loads of cattle up to the north and started the first big ranch. And he sold his meat to the reservations and importantly to the new railroads that were growing. So really that's why they sort of became ranchers. So they had huge, I don't think we can understand the extent of how big they were, but absolutely massive area of land that they ranched in. Now, why did this finish? Well, there's a number of reasons. There was a drought in 1883. Beef prices collapsed as well, so the demand reduced, and also in 1886 there was a really bad winter, and that obviously killed off a lot of the cows because they were further north by this stage. So these big ranches became much smaller ranches, That's what happened. Now, the reason why the look in this area is because their conflict was massive and all different types of people. Firstly, they had massive conflict issues with sheep farmers. Now, a lot of people started sheep farming. It was cheaper, it was quicker to get sheep going, but they obviously were after the same resources like water here. Particularly, they had massive issues with homesteaders. Homesteaders didn't want their cattle to get Texas fever. They basically fenced off their lands with barbed wire. This led to a series of disputes. The most famous of all, you would look back on this in the book, page 106, 107. This led to the Johnson County War. Now, I won't go into too much detail here, but basically, homesteaders were rustling cattle. And effectively, what was going on there is ranchers were branding their cows, and basically, homesteaders were stealing them. So, newly born calves, because obviously they needed animals for themselves. So, the ranchers hired up some killers, a group of killers, and they invaded the Johnson County, and the homesteaders fought back. Now, what happened in the end was the ranchers were pushed back, and the US government said we're going to protect them. We're horrified about what was going on here. So really that was a victory for homesteaders and really the demise of the power of the ranchers, particularly in states like Wyoming where this happened. The impact on the Indians was obviously huge as well. For example, one of the things was obviously by ranching and fencing off their own land, they prevented the spread of the buffalo herd. They also provided meat and easy meat for the reservations. So that's pretty much it for that. Okay, let's turn this off. Where are we?